Hi, good evening, everybody. As you all trickle in, please grab your tea and coffee. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us at today's session. I hope you joined us for the previous session that we had at 3 o'clock. We had a Power Pack panel there. We were discussing how to make every rupee count, especially during a crisis like this. How do you make sure that every Indian receives their rights and entitlements? Um, Today, we have our final session for the day, probably the most anticipated session that we've hosted over the last 2 days. We have Faye D'Souza and Barkha joining us at today's discussion, moderated by my colleague Gaurav Jain. We'll be discussing the intersection of journalism and law and justice and the role that journalism plays in shining a light on several injustices in our country. Quickly, before we move into the session, I'm also going to remind you that we have another session tomorrow. We will be doing a rerun of a very important discussion in the law and justice space, where we'll be talking about how we can unlock legal data for the field. The live of this is actually happening today. You can get more information on that on the agami.in page. We'll be doing a rebroadcast of that webinar tomorrow morning. Once again, if you've been joining us, for the various sessions that we've had since yesterday, you'll know that all of our sessions have been dedicated to Professor Shamnath Bashir, who unfortunately lost his life last year. Shamnath was a dear member of the community and a mentor to so many in this field. And Shamnath, we really miss you at this point in time, and today is dedicated to you. Yesterday was Shamnath's birthday, and last year for the Agami Summit, we also announced that we're renaming the citizenship prize that comes under the Agami Prize. We're renaming it to the Shamnath Bashir Prize, and if you'd like to find more information on that, you can visit agami.in/prize. Gaurav, are we good to go? All right, over to you, Gaurav, Faye, and Barkha. Take it away.
All right. Hey, thanks everybody, and thanks Faye and Barkha as well. I'll start with a very quick intro to the session and to both of you, and then we can get going. So welcome everyone here on Zoom and other streaming platforms to day 2 of Charcha 2020. As we hunker down in our homes, and all the experts keep telling us to keep social distance from each other, I think it's even more important to keep on a dialogue, to keep talking and arguing with each other. In that context, the Indian media has been key, and we hope will continue to be a key enabler of this dialogue, bringing us vital information, questioning the status quo, holding power accountable, and really holding up a mirror to all of us and this world that we're constantly building and pulling down. And during this particular crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, despite the fear and the medical emergencies, the lockdown, the loss of livelihoods, basically between all the uncertainties and confusion and contradicting information, the role of the media is even more vital, we feel, if we are to extend justice to the last mile, to every citizen in this country. Today, we'll talk about how journalists see their roles right now and how the larger media industry is reacting to the pandemic, how old formats are being abandoned, new rules are being written, how they are supplying and audiences are demanding the news differently, and perhaps if there are some opportunities for us all to help build a better post-COVID world. For this session, we have with us two of India's great masters of Charcha. Barkha Dutt is an award-winning TV journalist, anchor and columnist with more than 2 decades of reporting experience. She's reported from some of the toughest conflict zones in India and abroad, and has for the last few weeks been reporting on the ground again on what's really going on during this pandemic. Faye D'Souza is also an award-winning journalist who focuses squarely on public interest issues and is the former executive editor of Mirror Now. She likes to prioritize information over opinion, and her focus on issues like taxation, safety of women, education, health have resulted in several policy changes. I'm Gaurav Jain from Agami, an organization that advances ideas that serve justice. We identify and catalyze ideas that can transform our systems of law and justice through collaborative action. Barkha and Faye, welcome to this session, and thank you for being here. You're both on mute.
No, I'm not. I'm fine.
Okay, you're good.
And so,
All right, you're good.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, hey, thanks. Let's get started. My first question is really to both of you, just to lay the groundwork for our discussion. You know, among all the uncertainty and so much rapid change, where we're all glued to the news, we all want our daily data updates about what are the latest infection rates, where every week we're figuring out new things like whether to wear masks or not, whether to wear gloves or not, should we leave our slippers outside the house or not, etc. What are the protocols to do X, Y, and Z? I'm wondering, what are some of the stories or areas of information, whether at the micro level or even at the larger macro level, during this pandemic that you think the Indian media has helped us understand better, where it's taken us from a place of unknown to the known?
I mean, who do you want to go first?
Barkha, you go first.
Okay. So I was hearing your introduction, and I was just thinking that I don't think there is such a thing as Indian media. I don't know who you mean, what you mean when you say the media has held a mirror. I actually think that this was one of big media's big moments of failure. I don't think the media covered this story. I don't think television covered this story. I don't think television reported this story. I think this story was told by a handful of journalists on the ground, and it was told by what in the trade we call stringers, who are basically freelance contributors who across India provide a network of information, who are not even full-time employees with most media organizations. They're paid per story. And a group of, I would say, city reporters in some of our newspapers. 99% of Indian media did not report this pandemic. So I have a disagreement with the very premise on which we're having this conversation. I think this story was not told. I think this story was not reported. It's like that old line, this revolution will not be televised. TV flubbed it, and it was left to a group of sort of strong-willed storytellers to keep at it, to reporters and camera crews in small towns, and to the city reporters of some of our better newspapers to tell the story. So that's my first point. That said, I do think that the issue of the migrant workers walking the highways of our countries is something that has come through the sort of small group of reporters who are out there telling these stories, capturing these moments. And without those images, without those narratives, I think you would have seen an even more chaotic structural response than we've seen to the issue of how this lockdown is hitting our poorest citizens.
Hey, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. So I have a different perspective on this. I believe that, and if to answer your question specifically about getting out the information of what we're battling, right? And I think that was week one or even before lockdown, the idea that we have a contagious disease, that we need to stay 6 feet away from each other. We need to cough into our elbows. In a country like India, to be able to pass on that information to large groups of people, many of whom don't read, is a challenge. And I don't think that was particularly a challenge met by journalists. I think it was a challenge met by all media. I know that radio stations played a big role. Really local media played a really big role of just passing on that information, saying, hey, you know what, this is the problem that India is facing collectively. These are the measures that you need to take. I remember having conversations from the team at Swadesh Foundation, which actually form self-help groups. And they said, well, before cities began to shut down, villages had formed their own sort of, ring fencing, and they were checking everybody who was coming in. They had got their Asha workers to give them information, and they found a way to sort of keep the villagers safe. They were making sure that people who passed through the village were not stopping, were actually just running through. So I think the first battle or the first line, the front line, was in just passing on that information. And that, to a large extent, was done. And that it was not something for journalists. It was for radio. It was for, small, everybody in the media, whether it was advertising, did a large amount of it. Local newspapers did a large amount of it, and that, I think, was one massive thing. I think the other, chunk was also for data journalists. I agree completely with what Barkha is saying, And, just to circle back to the question about justice, right? Journalism tends to be the collection of evidence on the ground in any big event that happens in history. It's actual journalism that forms the basis for future petitions and arguments in court. It's actual journalism that will form the basis for justice that will be sought in the future. And that's the role really that journalism has to play, whether it is those who are questioning what's happening right now in Kashmir, whether it's those like Barkha who are reporting from the ground, those who are examining data, those who are, we've had a series of investigative reports that have come out about, cautions that have been released by scientists and the ICMR to the government, and whether or not the government has followed or the government has played heed to those cautionary reports. So I think all of this forms a basis of what justice the aggrieved parties will be entitled to in the future, because they have been documented by journalists on the ground right now. All of this will be basis of justice in the future. So it's, there's good journalism and bad journalism, but I believe the good journalism that is happening at this point will be how these people get justice in the future, and there will be justice. I'm a romantic about justice. I believe that it will be done, and it's because people like Barkha doing the work that they're doing right now, that justice will be delivered at some point. Correct?
Okay. All right. So, Barkha, today is what, day 60 of you being on the road?
Yep.
Yep. So you've been out there now for 2 months reporting across the country, on the ground about migrant workers, certainly doctors on the front lines, women and children walking the long road home. Just wondering, what's something that some surprising or unexpected challenges in reporting these stories that you found during this particular pandemic? Because you've had so much rich experience of different kinds of reporting in such extreme environments, I'm wondering what has surprised you in this, what is happening today?
So that's an interesting question. While I'm sitting here, just to tell people who are watching this or listening to this, we're about 100 kilometers short of Solapur in Maharashtra, and we're headed to Hyderabad in Telangana, which is, we expect to reach a little before midnight. And it's thunder lightning everywhere. And if at this point it rains, we will still have our car. But on the entire stretch of this highway are children, women, and men walking. And there is absolutely no cover or no shelter or no place to stop and even get a meal for them. And basically, I'll come to the reporting experience, but one point I wanted to make is that sometimes immediate relief takes very commonsensical and small measures. It's like this mask. This mask is a very small thing, but it's a huge protection against the virus. Similarly, when it was obvious that the workers were going to walk anyway, irrespective of whether you were going to say no to them, irrespective of whether you were going to start trains that would not be enough in number. I keep thinking as I travel these highways, why the government schools all along the highways cannot be converted into night shelters, why we can't ensure water and biscuits and food at schools along the highways. And it just befuddles me that there are certain small micro responses that the structure, the system can have and doesn't. Now, in terms of a reporting experience, I've seen war and riots and famine and a lot of conflict. So I thought when I started reporting this story that I would be prepared for whatever it threw my way. Yet I found in some ways this is the toughest story that I've ever reported on. And the reasons for that are varied. The reasons are, Gaurav, one, that the science kept changing even for reporters. So for example, in the beginning, I was not wearing this mask. In the beginning, we thought the masks should be left for those who really need them. Then the science became wear the masks. Then, the invisibility of what you're contending with. So you can try and not touch your face, and you can try and wash your hands 100 times a day, but you are always touching surfaces. I'm always doing the story and then touching my door handle to get into the car. And I actually at some point just simply give up. You have to give up at some point because you can't become totally anal about it because you'll never be able to do your work. Three, I think what's different for me in this is how difficult it was in the beginning to get people to care. Like, how could we be this country where the poorest of our citizens were walking every highway and you literally had to break people's heart to get them to care? I mean, this is not charity. You know, I remember one activist telling me in Rajasthan, he said, I love how people are now reacting and saying we care about these people as if you have generosity or you have charity. This is a basic rights argument. It's a basic equality. To come back to the intersection of law and media, we are talking about the fundamental rights of a citizen of this country. And I think what really shocked me is I set out to report a pandemic and I ended up reporting a humanitarian crisis. And so for me, it was a swift gear shift. It's not that I'm not telling the stories of doctors. It's not that I'm not inside COVID hospitals, but I find that most of my emotional energy is now getting consumed by the humanitarian crisis that has overshadowed what started off being the challenge of the pandemic.
And this humanitarian crisis, you're saying, could have been averted and is still not being managed well.
Oh yeah, see, look, I'm not saying, I mean, if I was so wise, I'd be running the country. So I'm not saying that, you know, the benefit of hindsight doesn't give all of us great wisdom. But when I think about how migrant workers have been handled, here's my point. At first, we pretended they didn't exist. So we never anticipated that there would be a mass exodus. When they started fleeing, we started blaming them. Oh, look at the absence of social distancing. They're crowding into the bus stops. They're crowding into the stations. Then we tried to stop them. We said, oh, we issued multiple orders saying it's a mistake for them to, it's illegal. It's illegal for them to move. So then we tried to lock them in. When that failed and they started walking, we started providing trains. When we started providing trains, we actually billed them for the fares. We charged these people whom we had taken away work and wages from 500 to 800 rupees to get home. And finally, in the ultimate edition of insult to injury, we are now wanting to dilute labor laws in some of our states. And these workers are basically saying we're not going to come back. And that is going to be the ultimate comeuppance, I think, for the revival of the economy. How are you going to reopen factories without these workers?
Okay, I'll come back to you, Barkha, on that point. Faye, you know,
Yes.
both Barkha and Faye, you both gone from television to the digital medium, especially social media. Faye, you've been analyzing and curating some remarkable issues of public interest in the last few weeks as well, including, say, the crisis in Mumbai's hospitals, but even, say, the Visakhapatnam gas leak, the dismantling of our labor laws, the proposed destruction of rainforest in Arunachal Pradesh. I'm wondering, as you do these things, and both in terms of the content, but also the format of switching format, have you found a change in your audience and their response to such issues?
Well, so there are a couple of things. Digital obviously gives you a far more intimate relationship with your audience because they're able to respond to it. It's almost like you know each other, and you know, people write to me directly. They message me directly. So there's a great deal of, is there something we can do about this? What can we do to change this? What can we do to actually action something on the ground? I found that along with the pandemic, there's a lot of stuff going down on the sidelines of our country that is not getting enough attention. For example, the Environment Ministry trying to push through permissions for 191 projects that will hurt our environment and doing it in a hurry in the middle of a lockdown. Now, this is something that would have otherwise, I don't think anyone else has really picked it up. And by lack of getting attention in the media, it could actually happen without anyone noticing. And I believe that that's a problem. The labor laws and what's happening with the labor laws is also a problem because largely urban India seems to think labor laws apply to somebody else and they don't apply to you and me as employees. The reason why my team and I have been stepping out and going to the hospitals is because the hospitals in and around Mumbai are facing a crunch like never before. We've reached almost what New York went through or was going through during the peak of its COVID crisis. And again, not really being documented. There were stories about body bags lying in the wards, but the actual numbers of how many beds we have in each hospital, how many of those beds have gone to COVID patients. So what happens to the remaining beds that are available? What happens to the non-COVID patients that are coming in? Where are the ICUs? I mean, I think it's fantastic now that the PM Cares Fund has now allocated 2,000 crore rupees to buying ventilators. But where will you put these ventilators? Where are the beds? Where are the ICUs? You have to actually have more to a bed than just the ventilators. There's so much going on in the healthcare sector physically right now. We still haven't gotten on top of the PPE problem. Still working with doctors and other NGOs to try and push PPEs in the right places, because there are still problems with actually getting protection for our healthcare workers. We have an inordinate number of healthcare workers who have tested positive in India because we're not able to protect them adequately with gear. So there is a lot of, I believe, a lot of attention that as journalists we can draw to stuff, and social media allows us to be able to do that. I think that the other story that we would be at tremendous risk and fault for allowing to slip through our fingers would be the gas leak story. I'm again very disheartened by how little mainstream media has cared about this story and how it has just sort of disappeared. I was making calls today to local journalists on the fact that no arrests have been made even now, so many days later, on that gas leak. LG has put out what can only be described as a weak sort of explanation saying, oh, we are going to look after everyone who got sick. But for a accident of that proportion to not be hammered down by the media is worrying, and that's something that I've personally made a commitment that I will stay on top of. I think also it's interesting when talking about labor laws that almost all large television news studios are based out of Noida in Film City, which comes under Uttar Pradesh. So Uttar Pradesh throwing out all of the labor laws could actually mean that none of these journalists ever get a Sunday off ever again, because that applies to all of them as well. But somehow nobody seems to have cared enough to blow a whistle on this. And now the governor has cleared it also. So there's, like I said, there's a lot going on that there's no spotlight. And I believe that when we work on social media, and I'm using social media, I'm using Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, there's still room to reach people who believe and to be able to sort of move people one-on-one. And I believe we can make a dent there.
Barka, what about you? What's your experience in terms of change of format, going from TV to now social media, YouTube?
So actually, I think that I've said this in another program with Faye, that the art of storytelling remains as necessary. The art of knowing how to string together visuals, the art of being able to tell a story really quickly, to think on your feet in the face of great tragedy, sometimes violence, sometimes a volatile situation. All of these were the original journalistic skills that one had acquired, learned, bettered, over the years. They're still as relevant. Nobody, I may have changed platforms like Faye, and there are many reasons for that. In mostly because I think TV is a redundant platform in the way that it's shaped up in India. I'm not saying TV has to be like that. I'm just saying it's shaped up like that here in our country to be completely talking heads driven. And that's not the kind of television that I ever wanted to be part of. That's one. I'm not even getting right now into the bigotry and the hate spewing and the hate mongering. I'm just talking about formats. For me, I think I'm the same reporter, same flaws, same fallibilities, same virtues. You learn every day, and I just think that I'm using a possibly freer platform, but also a much more immediate grammar. There is a much more immediate grammar somehow to the digital medium. You don't have to wait till 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. to catch a show for a designated amount of time. The story you tell does not get drowned under a mountain of 1 million other things that the channel has also done that day. So you have to tell people, oh, you didn't see this then. You can constantly just put out the information you want to, when you want to, on your terms, promote it as much as you want to. You're not dependent on some corporate machine telling you that you can't promote this story because who cares about poor people? No advertiser is going to care for poor people. All of that, is out of the way. So it's freer, it's more immediate. And in terms of storytelling, it's the same challenges. Technology has made many things possible. Maybe Faye and I would not have been able to do this a couple of years ago, in the middle of nowhere, under an umbrella in a car, having this conversation with you on a national highway, because Zoom and good internet speed allowed me to do it. Phones have become high resolution and better than most broadcast cameras. You can shoot much better on a tripod or a selfie stick in a phone today than you ever could, in the days when I started television. And frankly, God, of all the rest of it remains the same. I mean, my sense of Bombay's hospitals is exactly the same as Faye's. And that also tells you how incomplete TV's telling of the story has been, because you saw this mass vilification taking place of doctors at Mumbai Sion Hospital when that video went viral of these bodies next to patients. Not one person wanted to go and speak to the doctors. And when I went to interview them in Mumbai, one of them said to me that for years, we've had more than 3 patients on one bed. No media even bothered to come and tell this story. We're a Sarkari hospital with meager resources. We've always had a shortage of beds, but guess what? None of you care to tell our story. So I think it's brought home also to journalists the gaps in our storytelling, the issues we should have been focused on and weren't, because we were too obsessed with talking heads and party politics.
I want to zoom back a little bit from the problem end to say perhaps not so much solution end, but say opportunity end. So, say, for example, how migrant workers have now strongly entered our national consciousness and public debate. So many shifts have happened that nobody could have anticipated. Say things like, even something simple like people have stopped getting physical objects like newspapers to their homes. Companies like Twitter have said they're going to permanently offer work from home option even after the pandemic passes. I'm wondering, are there other such paradigm shifts that you're seeing as journalists that you feel the media should double down on as opportunities for coverage, so that the emphasis on those things stays even in a post-COVID world?
If I may, so Gaurav, obviously, like you absolutely said, right, we're not getting physical news. Large parts of the country are not getting their physical newspapers anymore. I don't think in the media we've ever had a case in the history of our of the industry that habits have been broken by force in this manner, where people who are so used to reading the newspaper don't have it, and they're being forced to read it on digital. So over 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, how many of them will go back to buying newspapers? Or will they just say, hey, you know what? I'm comfortable reading it on my phone and my iPad. Let's not do the raddi. Let's not do the paper. Let's not have to buy a newspaper. That's one thing. On the television side, I can tell you for sure that all television studios were already suffering from tremendous cost cutting and viability issues before any of this happened. Television is an expensive medium to run. Studios are expensive, teams are expensive, satellite transmission, cable TV, all of this stuff, distribution is expensive. We're seeing a complete shrinking of advertising. Consider this: if people are losing jobs, nobody is going to want to buy anything. If nobody buys anything, nobody is going to advertise anything. And if there's no advertisements, what will these television studios run on? So as a result, we're already seeing a massive layoffs. I expect from watching the industry that will only get worse. And you'll see thinning teams in television that already don't have the time to really put energy and love and attention into a story. I mean, the reason why Barkha and I are able to do the stories that we love is because we take one story and then put our hearts in it and then put it out. We're not feeding a 24/7 monster that needs to constantly be, fed something or the other. And as a result, the quality tends to drop a great deal because nobody has the time to do, research. Nobody has the time to put any love into any of it. So I believe that the English-speaking audience is going to move to digital almost entirely. Very few people will actually be renewing their, cable TV subscription. The regional language audiences will still watch television, but they will want their news to be very local and very specific. So this is going to be a great time to be an independent journalist. It's going to be a great time to tell local stories. It's going to be a great time to run a lean team of only the people who need to do what they need to do, and to focus on areas where we say that, okay, you know what, this is ring fenced. This is what I'm going to do. This is my team. This is where I will deliver success. I'm not going to attempt to compete with the big guys or to do a 24/7 thing. All right?
Barkha?
Oh, I mean, I totally agree with what Faye has just said. If I had to at this point think about, 20 other things that are also happening in the country, right? I don't think I could spend 60 days reporting on the ground on this one issue. Now, undoubtedly, the issue may be the biggest issue right now before us. But tomorrow I could be doing this for something else that I care about. I could be doing it about the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, or I could be doing it about what's happening in our borders, or I could be doing it about the state of government schools. It could be anything that I care about, or women and what's happening. How has feminism shifted over generations? It could be anything I care about. One thing that I think I understood as a TV insider is that people do not get their basic information from television anymore. And even if they do, there's a ticker tape at the bottom. It doesn't require any reportage. There's an aggregated sense of content in terms of information you're getting on your phone anyway, if you care to. You can log on to Twitter. You can log on to a website that you follow. You can log on even to a channel you follow and just pick up basic information. What people do is quality content. You hear it all the time. And television's revenue model is so broken. It is structurally so broken. And unfortunately, what that has done is that even to very bright, talented former colleagues, the formula has sucked them in. I'm pretty sure if I'd stayed on in television, I would have been sucked in too. There is something about the daily formula. You get numbed by it. You get attuned to it. You get lazy. It's a human thing. And therefore, one needs that disruption of technology, the disruption of digital. And I agree with everything Faye has said. I do not believe that English news television, given the revenue models and the state of the economy, and we're headed for a very rough couple of years. We haven't spoken about the economy. We're headed for a very rough couple of years. I just do not see English news surviving beyond, like a few people who are doing talking heads in a very pared down way. And so, the glory years of TV are over. They're well behind us.
Well, Faye spoke a little bit about, say, for example, how she feels like the story about the gas leak in Visakhapatnam should not be ignored. I'm wondering, in a country as vast as India, there are so many things happening all the time. And certainly, both of you are doing respectively important work on focusing on whichever areas you're focusing on. But also, I'm wondering, are there stories that, Barkha, you feel are in danger of getting buried right now that you may not be covering, but you wish the media was covering?
I mean, to me, I've covered a little bit of this, but I think it's going to be our biggest crisis in the year to come if this lockdown doesn't lift immediately. Millions of Indian children are going to fall out of the school system. If classes are going to continue to be online, if there is no clarity on schools opening, this is happening even in richer countries like the United States of America. So this assumption that homes have phones, if they have phones, they have data plans, if they have, and all of this is possible. To me, this is not just a story, but this is something that needs political attention. That's one. Two, I think I'm somebody who believes that a lot of things flow from the economy. I think that there is just not enough attention to structures that are endangered today. We have a structural crisis unfolding in front of us. We have entire sectors that are in existential crisis. We have a salaried middle class that is completely endangered today. And I've already spoken about our poorest citizens, which is why they weren't on top of my list. So I'm putting that in one basket already and saying the migrant workers, the informal workforce. But in addition to that, Gaurav, where is the other big future for journalism? And I know Faye does some of that, is data journalism. We need to be picking up numbers, studying them and explaining them. There's almost none of that goes on in television. When you see numbers in television, it's only the stock markets. Nobody's looking at the numbers and telling you that story. So for me, storytelling through numbers, through empirical storytelling, I'm a normative storyteller. I see a woman on the street with her child and I tell you that story, that's my strength. But it's not my strength to be an empirical storyteller, but I really respect those who are able to look at the numbers and tell me the facts. I know some data, some great work for that, but not enough people are doing that.
Sorry, we lost you in the last half a minute, Barkha.
Well, I was just saying, I wish there was more data journalism kind that we see in the state doing, but very few do.
Okay. Okay. I think we got the gist of it in terms of the importance of doing data journalism.
If I may chime in for just one moment, right? I believe that there is a also along with taking forward what Barkha said, I believe that there is a reluctance to criticize government at this point. And we've seen that from the very beginning. What a lot of media is doing is cheerleading. And it's happening right now as we speak. So basically, government keeps making announcements and the media just claps for government and say, oh, what a great idea. Oh, what a fantastic idea. Oh, this is fantastic. But that's not the job. And a lot of Indians have forgotten what the job of journalism is. Our job is to constantly kick the tires of every idea, every announcement, and find out if that is really what was necessary. So have we really asked the question over and over again of whether or not, the relief measures being announced at this point by the finance ministry are in fact what is needed? I mean, simple question that should be asked, that all of the announcements, and I'm just looking at what's being announced on agriculture as well, all of the announcements are about loans. I mean, you're giving loans to street vendors. They don't need loans right now. This idea that relief can be handed out in debt, which is that come and borrow money from the banks, is ridiculous, because these people, you're creating a bubble of debt, first of all, which will perhaps never be paid back. And debt is not what these people need right now. People need money to be transferred to their accounts, but there seems to be a massive reluctance to do that. Instead, there is a need to sort of just announce these balloon loan schemes to farmers, to fishermen, to street vendors, saying borrow money from us and we'll give you loans at low rates. I don't see how that is relief at all. I mean, if you were starving on the street and I said, hey, I'll give you a loan if you fill out this paperwork, it makes no sense. But somehow not enough people are asking these questions. Not enough people are kicking the tires in the media and asking questions of how much of this works and how much of it doesn't work. We're not learning from what other countries have gone through, how much of it, what the experience of other countries has been. And I just want to point out, for those people who are going to criticize me for saying this as well, remember that this entire problem started because China suppressed its numbers, because Chinese journalists who were reporting the truth disappeared, and some of them have not been heard from even today. And China not telling the truth actually caused this entire problem for the rest of the world. So suppressing journalism, not allowing people to ask questions, not encouraging really the questioning of the system and the questioning of the announcements and the questioning of the government could get us into far worse trouble than we already are. So I do understand that people seem to think that we're in a war-like situation and supporting the government is the only way forward, but that's not the job of a journalist. A journalist's job is not to support, a journalist's job is to ask questions. Absolutely. And if we forget that, we might be in trouble.
So actually that segues nicely into my final question before we can open it to the audience. I wondered, and Barkha, you spoke at the very beginning about how you feel like the Indian media and certainly the television media has failed us. But if you think about the global media and in all formats, think about all the things that are happening, think about your own things who you admire, Faye and Barkha, you both doing good work. I wonder what are your feelings about the coming future in this, not in the very long term, but say in the medium term, in the next 2 years, 3 years, as we go through the horizon of this pandemic. What are your feelings about how will the media be able to enable justice for the Indian citizens?
Okay, I'm only able to get the fourth word because it's pouring here, so I'm really hoping you're able to hear me. What are my thoughts? I agree with Faye that I think there's a hesitation to question power. I think we managed to turn everything into this virtual mob-driven nationalism test. I'm as proud an Indian as anybody else. I cut my teeth reporting the military. I cut my teeth as a reporter covering a war. I'm extremely sentimental about the Indian state. I don't really have Arundhati Roy-esque politics on the notion of a nation state. But I think it's absolutely ridiculous that any moment of economic or social disruption in this country, which is basically to say any crisis, is converted into whether you're a nationalist Indian test or not. In other words, journalists are so busy ticking the boxes on that test that we're not doing our job. And so many people are so desperate for that approval, for that popularity ranking online, for their sense of where the dominant opinion lies today, that so many of our fraternity has become averse to telling the uncomfortable story. But I agree with Faye, I think it is our job to tell the uncomfortable story. So that's one. Secondly, I think when you ask me about the future, look, for people like us, I do believe the future belongs to independent journalists, provided everyone who's part of this conversation today and everybody else is willing to support it in some way. So, for example, what you pay for your Tata Sky subscription, if you're really bored with what you see on Tata Sky or whatever else, Airtel, move that to paying for subscription on digital platforms that you respect. Because what will happen is if you're not willing to pay for some content, then we're going to be back to the kind of tyranny of the market where some advertiser is going to decide what you can show and can't show. And I'm not averse to advertisement. I think that one has to just choose. There are certain products that I would never choose to be advertised by. But other than that, the future belongs to a mix of subscription-driven support, advertising, offline events, and partnerships. That is where I see the future of digital platforms. And I think that so many people complain about the quality of journalism that they get. The one way in which they can actually be part of the solution is to monetarily support the journalism they respect.
Very well said.
That's well said, and I think at the baseline, I think that really comes to the crux of it in terms of if you want good journalism, you need to support it, and you need to put the money where it belongs. Faye?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Barkha is saying about this, and this has also been my personal experience. So like I told you, running television studios is a very, very expensive proposition, right? Now, what you pay as a customer is pittance. It doesn't cover anything. So actually the person paying for the service of journalism is the advertiser. The advertiser is picking up the tab, and hence the advertiser is the customer. The viewer is not the customer. The viewer is the commodity. The viewer is the commodity that is being chopped up and sold to somebody else. So you are the chicken in the chicken shop. You are not the customer. And that's something that viewers need to realize about television studios. And we have to also realize that in a worsening economy, and this has been happening for the last year or so, the largest advertiser is the government, and not just center, but every state government. Governments spend crores and crores of rupees on public service advertisements and advertisements from political parties during elections, which happen on a regular basis in this country. It is the largest route of finance. It is the largest route of revenue for television channels. Also, these conclaves that they keep doing, in which they raise money through conclaves, which is why they do conclaves, involves the blessing of the government, because you need ministers from Prime Minister, Home Minister, Finance Minister, Railways Minister to come and attend your conclaves. That's the only way, when you get confirmations from government, it's the only way you will actually get advertising from advertisers. So all of this entire system now is dependent on the blessings of the government. And obviously, when you ask tough questions of that government, those blessings are then withdrawn. So now where are you? You cannot be a television channel that asks tough questions of government, because you will no longer be economically viable. You will no longer be, financially viable as a business if you are tough on government. And that's just the truth of the model. I believe that the model is broken, which is why you see so many journalists becoming independent and going off on their own, because it's easier for me to pay the salaries of 3 people through what I'm making from my social media than have to run a large television channel of 500, 600 people and be dependent on the government's sort of blessing to stay alive. Got it?
Right. So I guess, in terms of, it's both at the production end, keeping it lean, keeping the cost low, not being dependent on masters who might control your line, as well as appealing to your audience in terms of getting them to support your work directly rather than through advertising? I want to open it up to the audience questions. We've got a bunch of them. Let's see how many we can get through. But Barka, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, great. So the first question is...
I mean, it's pouring, so I don't know how long I can do this, but yeah.
Sure. We'll just go on for another 10 minutes if we can. The first question is actually related to this larger event that we are part of, Charcha, where all kinds of developmental organizations and themes and issues have come together. And the question is from the audience is, in these times of increasing lack of optimism, for those of us who believe in a free, truthful, and independent press, what do you see? How can other sectors, how can the developmental sectors, how can nonprofits support media to remain free and independent?
Well, I think the answer is simple. There is a multitude of choices out there in terms of journalists that you follow, whose content you follow. I think, as Faye said, there's a bunch of us who have branched out on our own. If you value the work that we are doing, please understand that at the moment we are paying for this. For literally, as Faye said, from the money that our channels may be monetized to earn in terms of, just algorithmically, a little bit, our partnership that we may do here and there. We don't actually have a revenue stream. We are self-funded. Please understand this. We don't have hidden sponsors. We don't have hidden investors, at least not at the moment. I'm not saying those will never come, but we're startups. And at the level of startup, we need support. So if you think that Faye's work on breaking down data or explaining the gas leak is invaluable, or if you think my being on the ground for 2 months is invaluable, when we come to you and say, subscribe to our content, pay a little bit, do pay a little bit, because you are ready to pay that money for your newspaper, you are ready to pay that money for your Tata Sky subscription, and you complain about a lot of that non-stop. So one, pay us. Secondly, I think a lot of you have access to grants that journalists don't. I don't know if Faye will agree with this, but a lot of times when we go out to seek, revenue streams, people are hesitant to fund journalists because of repercussions they may feel, political repercussions or otherwise. So a lot of times, we have to convince them that, look, and they'll give us something and they'll say, don't be political, whatever that word means. But you hear this a lot, don't be political, just do content that's free from politics, right? Now, in some ways, you guys in the development sector have access to grants that we don't. Find ways to work on campaigns with us where you think there's a match of value systems, right? We are good storytellers. We do tell stories other than, the news of the day. Use us, build partnerships with us, amplify us.
Yes. So I think that the first point, my message to brands will be conscious of the kind of journalism you are sponsoring. There are still brands, and this is the unfortunate part, that advertising goes to the TV channels with the highest TRPs. And we all know how they get the highest TRPs. They get the highest TRPs by whipping up the most communal, most vile, most, almost destructive message. A lot of times it's based on faulty information and bad journalism. But we see that brands are almost agnostic to the quality of journalism that they're sponsoring. They will continue to sponsor these channels. One is, I would ask for brands to not do that. Secondly, like Barka said, that I hear this a lot as well. Can you not be, we'll do this with you, but please don't do anything political. Brands don't want to be associated with anyone who asks questions of government. Brands don't want to be associated with anyone who gets trolled on Twitter because they believe they will get their share of trolling as well. We've seen this happen in the past. There's a certain amount of cold feet with advertisers and with funders when it comes to this sort of thing, because they don't want to get flack from government, and that becomes a little then difficult for us to push forward. My only appeal to everyone who's watching is that if you want good journalism, you have to pay for good journalism. Journalists at the end of the day are human beings who need to pay their EMIs and their school fees for their children and put food on the table. And if you want good, talented, bright young people to join the profession, you have to be willing to pay that service. I mean, would you refuse to pay your doctor? And what sort of, and we're in the middle of this healthcare crisis for precisely this reason. What sort of healthcare would you expect if you're not willing to pay for it? Or if, we can't be in a system where the government subsidizes journalism, but would you not pay any of your other services? If someone was coming in and doing some electric work in your house, would you expect that person to do it for free? And if that was the case, what would be the quality of the service that you receive? And so we have to ask ourselves these questions. If we believe that journalism is in fact the fourth pillar of democracy, if you believe you want bright people, smart people, responsible people, people who are not corruptible to do this job, you have to be willing to pay for that service. If you want it for free, there are people who will yell at you for free about Hindu, Muslim, Mandir, Masjid, even in the middle of a health crisis, on a completely free-to-air channel, because they're being funded by somebody else, because your interests are not their interests. So at the end of the day, it's up to customers to decide. And I believe that I'm willing to work for those people who are willing to pay for it. It's at the end of the day, it just boils down to that.
All right, I think we have time for just one last question. It's a fairly broad question, so I don't know you guys how much you want to go into it. The question is, what can be done to stop the spread of hate speech and fake news being promoted in our TV media?
Who are you? Are you asking me? Are you asking Barkha?
We'll go with Barkha first.
Sure.
Okay. Look, I think we've mainstreamed hatred. There's no easy way to say it, but we have mainstreamed hatred. For example, there are many things that were wrong with the Tablighi Jamaat congregation in Delhi. Mostly it was extremely careless and it went against the Delhi government notification. But from there, for example, to make that a pretext to smear all Indian Muslims, to then use phrases like Corona Jihad. I mean, I actually found myself interviewing people where this phrase was used. And I just said, I'm sorry, I don't typically believe in censorship, but this is not going on any platform that I support. And I'm removing it. And I was grateful that I was not live. I was grateful that it was recorded. I'm not going to contribute to the process of mainstreaming hatred. Now, this is a very difficult, as those of you who are lawyers, you know this. This is an age-old ethical tussle, right? There are countries like the United States of America where they will privilege the First Amendment over hate speech. In India, we have reasonable restrictions in our constitution. For me as a journalist, it's an extremely awkward question because I ideally do not want to censor anybody. I believe that ideas can be confronted with better ideas. Fake news can be confronted with accurate information. But unfortunately, we have seen television being used as a kind of machinery for hatred. That is what it is. It's day in and day out a factory for hate. And honestly, the answer cannot lie with journalists like me and Faye. We're doing what we can at an individual level. The answer lies with all of you, the audience. You can turn this tap off. You have to stop watching these people for random entertainment, in morbid fascination, for sociological surveys. You've got to stop watching them, because the moment you watch them, you are contributing to their numbers, which gives them a pretext to get advertising. It's the market that has to finish them in the end, not law, the market. And therefore, every time I'm confronted with this, oh, how bad is TV news? And, you're all just, you guys are TRP chasers. I always say, what is a TRP? I'm not getting right now into how it's manipulated and how it's fudged. I think they've spoken about that. But at its basic level, a television rating point is the audience. You can reject the content that you hate. You can turn off the tap of hatred. You can embrace the content that you like. You just have to be willing to pay not too much, just a little bit for it. Possibly the cost of like less than one meal out per month. If all of you just did that, you'd be supporting, you could support several independent journalists.
Faye, any last thoughts?
Any last It's ominous, actually, that we're talking about the death of journalism, and I'm telling you my last final thoughts. Um, well, I believe, like Barka said, I believe that it's in the hands really of the viewers. And I said that your attention span is what is being commoditized by all these platforms. So be really picky about who you give your attention to. Be really picky about what you are willing to forward, what you push through. I think there's also, and I'm specifically sure about the audience that's watching right now, there is a responsibility we have as those of us who are educated, who have access to information, who have access to platforms, to call out this sort of nonsense. You have the ability to write back on your WhatsApp groups and say, hey, listen, uncle, this is not true. Please do not forward this. I mean, I've got, and I really make a meal of this. I quite enjoy it, actually. So I get forwards from, old videos from 2015, 2014 of namaz in Baikala saying that, look, this is happening right now. And I write back saying, hey, you know what? This is not true. This is not happening right now. And do not do this. So it's important to call this out. And a lot of times we tend to shy away saying, kaun batayega yaar, jaane do. But every time we do that, we allow these things to move forward. And we're adding, I mean, silence is complicit, right? Let's remember that silence is complicit. We no longer have that luxury of being silent anymore. So if you believe something is wrong, please say something about it. At least it's no longer on your conscience anymore for allowing you to move forward because you were silent. Pay for journalism and pay for journalists that you believe in. I'm not going to tell you this is good and this is bad, or this person is credible and this person is not. I believe that every individual is intelligent and you can tell. You know when you are being lied to. It's instinctive. Pay and support those who are doing the awesome, who are doing good work, who are doing awesome work. Withdraw your attention and withdraw your support from those who are doing bad work. It's as simple as that. Stop. I mean, it's stop buying crappy products. If you were to buy a food product and it always turned out to be rotten when you opened the can, one hopes you will stop buying. It's exactly the same thing. Do not give your attention to journalism platforms that are doing bad and irresponsible work. God.
Okay. I think that's about all the time we have for. I think fundamentally, I mean, thank you both, Barka and Faye, for this really rich and impassioned discussion. And I feel like, I think fundamentally the point that I've got from both of you repeatedly is really this thing that not all of us, not just as news consumers, but also as citizens, if we want the world to reflect our values, then we need to step up as news consumers, as citizens. So we need to both support, say, independent media or journalists that we feel close to, as well as say we need to decline or deny our attention from say people who may be the bad eggs, who may be disrupting the system, who may be and doing worse in terms of putting out fake news and hate speech. Hey, thanks again, everybody. This has been really good.
Guys.
And
thank you.
Good luck for all your work.
Thank you. Good luck, Barka.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Did we take the video or not? It's going to be the super video.